When optional becomes default. The calendar invite says tentative, the meeting link is one click away, and the last-minute cancellation arrives as a notification while someone else is already sitting there with a checklist open and notes prepared. When everything becomes optional, obligations don't vanish evenly. They migrate. The cost of flexibility gets transferred from the person who can opt out to the people and systems that must absorb the disruption, covering the shift, rewriting the plan, maintaining the relationship, keeping the work coherent. This isn't mainly about individual character or good intentions. It's about what our tools and norms reward: low-friction exits, reversible commitments, and the appearance of availability without the reality of follow-through. Optionality feels like agency, but at scale, it can quietly weaken the shared expectations that make cooperation possible. Optionality is a feature of many modern systems: subscriptions that pause, gigs that reschedule, groups that drop in, messages that can be ignored without explanation, policies that treat attendance as a preference. These designs reduce immediate discomfort. They also reorganize responsibility. Here's the mechanism. Platforms and organizations compete on convenience. The incentive is retention and growth, and convenience is measurable. Fewer steps, fewer penalties, fewer required decisions. The easier it is to postpone, cancel, or defer, the more the system can promise. You're never trapped. That promise attracts users, and the feedback loop tightens. More people expect reversibility, so systems make reversibility the default. So expectations of reversibility increase again. But reversibility has a cost. Someone has to do the coordination work that used to be carried by stable norms: reconfirming, rebooking, reminding, reassigning, smoothing conflict, repairing confusion. The people who benefit are those with the most options, those whose time is most protected, whose labor is most portable, whose status makes their absence survivable. The people who bear the cost are often those closer to the work: the colleague who covers, the caregiver who rearranges, the coordinator whose job becomes chasing confirmations, the community member who keeps showing up to half-full rooms. A key constraint appears here: time is not reversible. A seat held for someone who might come is a seat that another person didn't get. A slot reserved in a schedule is not easily repurposed at the last minute. A relationship that is repeatedly maybe becomes harder to trust. Attention is also a constraint. Every optional commitment requires more checking, more monitoring, more follow-up, more mental overhead. So the trade-off is clear. We gain flexibility and reduce immediate friction. We lose predictability and shared rhythm. We gain the power to keep doors open. We lose the clarity that lets others plan their lives with dignity. We gain personal optionality. We pay with collective volatility. And notice what gets optimized. Systems optimize for the visible metric: clicks, bookings, active users, fast responses, not for the invisible labor of maintaining reliability. The cancellation is logged, the disappointment is not. The reschedule is counted, the erosion of trust is not. The system permits exit at low cost to the leaver, and that permission becomes a norm. This is how obligations disappear, not by being argued against, but by being priced at zero in the interface. Name the cost, not just the benefit. Obligation is not only a moral category, it's an infrastructure for human dignity. To be treated with dignity is, in part, to be able to rely on others without having to constantly negotiate whether today counts. Stable commitments give people agency because they reduce uncertainty: a predictable schedule, a dependable role, a friendship that doesn't require repeated proof tests. When everything is optional, agency becomes unevenly distributed. The person with many alternatives experiences optionality as freedom. The person with few alternatives experiences it as instability imposed from above. One person's convenience becomes another person's scramble. Responsibility also changes shape. In a high-optional world, responsibility becomes harder to locate because the system offers plausible deniability. I didn't promise. I was waiting to see. It was tentative. I can always make it up later. Yet communities cannot run on deferred accountability. Work cannot stay coherent if commitments are always provisional. Relationships cannot deepen if presence is always negotiable. Attention is where the shift becomes visible. Optionality trains attention to scan for better deals, easier paths, and exits. It encourages a posture of contingency, keeping commitments at arm's length so they can be dropped. Over time, that posture can thin out the meaning of participation itself. Not because people are shallow, but because the system keeps reinforcing the idea that nothing should cost too much, especially not loyalty, patience, or endurance. A humane system doesn't eliminate choice. It makes the costs of choice legible and shared, so consent is real and not quietly subsidized by the most burdened. Notice where optional is doing hidden work in your world, where it functions less like freedom and more like a transfer of risk. Consider which commitments in your environments are treated as revocable by default, and who has to compensate when they are revoked. Consider what kinds of labor become necessary when reliability is no longer assumed. The reminders, the confirmations, the contingency plans, the emotional and logistical cleanup. Name the obligations that still exist, even when they are not enforced by penalties. The obligation to be predictable enough for others to plan. The obligation to acknowledge impact. The obligation to keep coordination from becoming someone else's unpaid job. And notice the difference between being available and being dependable, two different designs for a life together. When the world offers a cancel button for everything, responsibility doesn't disappear. It just moves off screen onto someone else's day. Let that be a quiet measure. Shared life requires costs, and accounting for them is how we keep dignity without blame.